Season 5 of Stranger Things was a massive letdown. The audience, well, most of the audience were very disappointed and dissatisfied with the ending. Why, you may ask? Well, all the queer baiting and the rage baiting. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. And I know season 5 has been released for a long time, but I don't see the discourse around it dying anytime soon. Besides, I'm a huge fan of the show and I have my thoughts about, this season. And I mean, considering that I've spent my New Year's anticipating the release of the show and was let down massively, I think I deserve to milk it a little bit for content. Anyways, let us begin then. I don't think that season 5 even tried to address the very big glaring plot holes in the series. To make matters worse, the Duffer Brothers went on interviews relentlessly and ruined everything about the show that could be potentially salvaged. Not to mention the follow-up documentary was practically rage bait for longtime fans and even some of the actors. Judging by Millie Bobby Brown's reaction, I don't think she was a fan of her ending. Not even gonna lie, till season 5, I didn't even know what Byler was, okay? I didn't even know about his existence. I don't even know if it was a thing back then. I know now some of the people have connected the dots and all of that, but till season 3, I know something was up with Will, like his queerness was pretty much apparent, but Mike and him, the dynamics between them were still pretty unclear, I would say, without the context of the later seasons. And then season 4 drops, and everybody talks about that van scene, the scene that I'm referring to, where Will wells up not only wells up, breaks into sobs after confessing his true feelings to Mike, but indirectly, you know. So,
Hard, we'd all fall apart. Even Elle, especially Elle. These past few months, she's been so lost without you. It's just she's so different from other people, and when you're different, sometimes you feel like a mistake. But you make her feel like she's not a mistake at all. Like she's better for being different.
The van scene was really beautifully done. It was devastating and it was emotional at the same time. And you truly feel so much pity for Will, because his friend is sitting there clueless and he's just, having to deal with so much pain. And, and unrequited love always hurts, especially if it's with your best friend. Anyways, I thought that there was no way Netflix is gonna make Byler a real thing, especially with 11 around. So I was like, yeah, not a chance. And I have had experience with shows like this where, they queer bait the audience into thinking, well, these two people are gonna end up as a pair, but it never happens. So I was like, yeah, not falling for that again. Mind you, when I talked about the season 4 stuff, I was not really keeping up with what is happening behind the scenes. Like, I was not really up to date with the promotional stuff and all of that. I just enjoyed the show and I thought it was pretty cool, but I didn't know what the actors were doing or, I didn't really keep tabs like that. I didn't really notice that they have been using Byler as a promotional tool. So, season 5 part 1 dropped, and along with it my jaw dropped as well, because episode 4, what was that? Episode 4 ending scene, what was and it is for the first time that I realized that the people who shipped Byler had reason to believe that their ship was real, because that is how they are set up. And they were not just making conspiracies in their tinfoil hats. There's so much, like, narrative wise evidence that Byler could have been a thing. You know what? To get their perspective, I sort of checked out their videos, a little bit of videos that are already available on YouTube, and that might have been a wrong decision, because you know what? After seeing that video, my suspicion of Byler being canon even strengthened. And I was like, yeah, maybe for the first time, Netflix is actually doing this thing where Byler would be Endgame. But now I knew that with 11 in the scene, that was kind of not possible unless they do something really drastic, which I was not interested in seeing, you know, cheating happening. I do not condone that and don't want to see that, especially when these children have already suffered through so much. So I didn't know how they were gonna, address that, but they got expert writers in the studio, and I don't know, I mean, they can do anything. So I was hopeful and I thought, they will probably make something up and it will be good. I thought maybe for the first time, this is not going to be just queer bait, it's going to be something real. And I mean, I was still pretty skeptical about it. I just thought that this love triangle sort of situation that has occurred will be addressed somehow. And I, for some reason, thought it was going to be Will who's going to die. I mean, I had my two theories. First theory was Will is going to die, and in the end, he's going to confess his feelings to Mike, and it's going to be devastating and all of that. And I had another theory, and it was the more hopeful theory. It was that, they would go together in college, and Will would confess somewhere down the line, and Mike would be like, well, I don't feel like that, or something along the lines of, he would be a little bit uncomfortable, and Will be heartbroken, but he'll move on, he will go to a different college, and Mike and Elle will settle down, maybe in Hawkins or somewhere else, and they will try, you know, being together as couples, and it just wouldn't work out because um, it just wouldn't work out for whatever reason. Like maybe Elle would grow more into herself. Elle would become more confident, and grow up into this woman and become more confident, and she wouldn't have this constant dread of trying to protect everybody, especially the people that she held dear, like Mike and Hopper and all the rest. I thought that maybe she could seek out someone else who didn't know much about her past but loved her nonetheless, without having to connect, without her having powers, kind of a thing. Like someone who'd accept her for herself and not her powers. Like I was imagining something like that, and maybe she would move on with that person, and Mike would be like, you know what, back in the days when Will told me he liked me, I kind of liked him back too, and they would sort of meet up and reconcile, and I don't know, fall in love with each other. That is what I thought is going to happen for some reason, and well, that didn't happen. Both of the theories were very far off, clearly. To be very honest, I was very scared and dreaded the theory that one of the main characters will die, especially Will. And you know what? He is a kid who's gone through so much trauma, so much suffering, and I thought that he deserved to be happy. His whole childhood was sort of stolen away from him by this interdimensional monster. So I was like, yeah, you know what? He deserves a little bit of happiness and peace in his life. And I would have been really pissed if they killed off Will, but I just thought that that would happen because they have to address the sort of love triangle somehow, and what, Will is some, Will is connected to Vecna, and I just felt like he would have to sacrifice himself or something to sort of cut off the connection with Vecna, and maybe then they will be able to defeat the Mind Flayer. Like that was what I was thinking. So yeah, I was not for that theory, by the way. Just never in a million years did I expect that they will actually finish off the main character like Elle. Like I didn't imagine that, and that is something that pissed me off so much. I think I would have this much of a visceral reaction for Will as well. By the way, just so you know, the follow-up documentary that I called Rage Bait previously, in that documentary that they always discussed that Elle's fate is going to end up like that always. She's not going to be a part of this world like Hawkins, the rest of the kid, because she's different and all of that. And they were joking about her condition, and I just was really mad about that. But again, I have to think that okay, this is a fictional character, and I have to cool myself down like that. But it just didn't seem fair that a character who's gone through so much and has always put others' needs above herself had to sacrifice, for the greater good. But I would like to talk a little bit about the inspiration of Stranger Things here because I think it is important, and the reason why I think that they had already planned the ending for 11 to be like this. So, if you didn't know already, Stranger Things is partly inspired by the anime slash manga, I think, called Elfen Lied. And basically, if you haven't seen the anime, I'm just gonna, give a summary to you. The camera starts with the view of a severed hand, then it pans into the face of a very scared looking security guard, and then it slowly moves upwards, and we see that there's this person sort of trapped into, I mean, wrapped with a straight jacket kind of a thing, and her head is in a helmet, and she's like hoisted up by this metal thingy, the way Callie was in this season. Okay, and there's another person who's like staring at horror at this person that has been hoisted up. So, and within seconds, heads explode. Yeah, the anime is quite gory, but so if you want to watch it, be careful about that. Anyways, and then we see that this thing that this person who was hung up and hoisted up in the metal thingy, he sort of breaks out of the straitjacket, confines, you know, and she's just wholly naked, and she has a helmet on her head, and she walks straight out, and walks straight out, and she's like able to open the doors without having any keys or anything like that. So yeah, she is escaping what seems like a laboratory of sorts. What is that reminiscent of? 11. 11, yeah. So anyways, after that, we learn that this this woman who is like trapped in that straitjacket thing and hoisted up, she is actually a diclonius. A diclonius is a species, different than humans, of course, but similar species, and they look much like humans, except they have like these two protrusions on top of their head that looks a lot like cat ears. And the most distinguishable thing between humans and a diclonius is that they have these invisible hands sort of thing, and they call it vectors in the anime. And these invisible hands have a huge range, and they're very fast, very strong, and pretty much they make the Diclonius invincible because they are resistant to bullets, anything, any strong thing, they can destroy it. So, like, imagine having these two invisible hands that make you as strong as a vampire. So that is what is happening, okay? So this girl, this Diclonius girl, she escapes the laboratory, and in the final moment they try to shoot her in the head, but she has that helmet on, and it sort of cracks open, and she falls onto a cliff and hits her head on a rock. Next, we see she has been washed into the shore, and she's like now awake, but her head is bleeding. And that is where she meets these two individuals, a boy called Kota and his cousin Yuka. And they take her in, but remember, the Diclonius had a head injury, and I sort of think that this is why the Diclonius has this sort of split personality, because the Diclonius is shown to be very ruthless in the first few scenes, but once she hits her head on the rock, she sort of regresses into this infant-like state, and she just doesn't speak any word. She just repeats the same thing over and over again, and she says mew, which is like a mew kind of thing. She kind of talks like a cat, and she's also like naked. She behaves like a kid, and and the guy Kota has to basically sort of teach her everything and like kind of act like her guardian for some time, but he doesn't know that she possesses all these powers, right? But she has, again, like I said, this Cyclonius has this split personality thing where she, sometimes when she's in contact with some kind of, she's in this flight or fight kind of situation, it kind of invokes like a trauma response out of her, and she changes and she becomes that ruthless Cyclonus version of herself, and she annihilates everything that comes her way. So yeah, it's a pretty complicated series, and I am not gonna go into details. There's like a bunch of, there's a character who's called Papa by a Diclonius, not the main character, but then there's another Diclonius, and like there's like three Diclonius. So yeah, but it's pretty much inspired by that anime, so it makes sense that the ending would also be inspired kind of like that. In the end, one of the Diclonius just sort of self-destructs herself because, she's like the queen Diclonius, which means that she can spread the genetic mutation by one of her invisible hands touching a man, and that will mutate the man's genes, and every offspring born from that man would be a Diclonius, and Diclonius would take over the world and kill all humans. I mean, that was what was going to happen if the main Diclonius, our main character called Lucy, if she didn't die. So she sort of self-destructs. And if you have noticed, Stranger Things sort of follows the same pattern. Like 11 has to die because, or else the government and the authorities will follow her for her blood and chase after her till they're able to, get some of her blood or some of her DNA samples so that they can replicate the experiment and have these, other babies who are born with supernatural powers and telekinetic powers. So yeah, I mean, I think that they had planned Eleven's ending from the beginning, considering that this was the anime that inspired it. Now that I've kind of addressed the queer baiting issue and, the whole, discourse regarding Elle's death, I just want to talk about the glaring plot holes in the series. First of all, narrative-wise, they gave a lot of importance to the painting that Will made, and it felt like it would hold some kind of significance with Mac being the heart of the troop, or like the, leader of the group, and he was definitely a part of that. He definitely played a part in that, but nothing that sort of aligns with that narrative, like why was the picture or the painting so important? That is my first plot hole. I think, they didn't do a great job addressing that. And secondly, Will's queerness is brought up time and time again throughout the series, to the point that you understand that it has something to do with his inhibitions, right? His fears. And it is in the end addressed somewhat because, Vecna is using that fear of his against him, and that is why he needs to face that fear and come out in front of everybody, which but they didn't, which again, that scene was horrible, but they didn't do a great job of, showing that Vecna was terrorizing him and using his sort of queerness against him. We do see Vecna constantly telling him that you're weak, you don't fit here, you don't belong in society, sort of things like that, which can be allusions to his, you know, queerness, but there's no like specific moment where it's like, well, Vecna is being homophobic, to be honest. The coming out scene was so horribly done. Like, if it was done better, and if the queer characters were treated, with respect and given nice emotional scenes, of importance and emotional depth, I wouldn't have said that Stranger Thing was queer baiting. Byler aside, even if Will's emotional scene was dealt with care and, gravity, it would have been so much better. The entire scene seemed like a parody, to the point even SNL made fun of it. And I know a lot of people were mad at Finn Wolfhard for, partaking in that sketch, because SNL sort of made fun of it. But I think they poked fun at the fact that that scene was actually used in the final footage of Netflix biggest show. Like, how could you do that? Like a whole room full of people and everybody going, I accept you, sort of a thing. Like, And then the other plot hole, like why was the mind flayer collecting like exactly 12 kids? I mean, what was the significance of that? Why 12 only? Like a clockwork. I thought there has to be something to do with time travel, and they did not even explain why like everything on upside down stays a specific date, the date of Will's disappearance. Like they didn't explain that as well. So yeah, a lot of us are kept in the dark still because I think they're planning a sequel of some sort. But yeah, I mean, I understand fans' frustration with this series, and there's so much to talk about regarding, because the world building with Stranger Things was so big. I think everybody struggled to tie the loose ends. And but if you have seen the documentary, a lot of the writers actually brought up certain points, like in the final fight scene, only the Mind Flayer Vecna are fighting. There are no demo organs whatsoever. And one of the writers actually brought up that fact, and they didn't care to address that either. So I mean, the Duffer Brothers said that they were under a lot of pressure by Netflix, but they also had like 3 years to work this out. I think the only character they have not assassinated in this season was Vecna, to be honest. Like, I was kind of hoping that Vecna would have a redemption arc, but they didn't give it to him, which was, I think, pretty much nice to see. Like, it would have been too cliched if Vecna had a, change of mind and suddenly was like, Bill and Mike and Elle, I'm gonna fight for you, because that would, it would have been cliche. Actor was so really brilliant at showing the conflict in Vecna's mind, where he's like, should I consider supporting these people, or should I just be with the Mind Flayer? And then he says, the Mind Flayer and I are together. We fight for the same cause, sort of a thing.
So I basically lost the footage of the outro, so I was just babbling about how I really preferred the open ending for 11, where, Mike says that she's looking for the waterfalls and all of that. And I really thought that was kind of cool, even though it's only Mike's coping mechanism. But what I didn't like is that the Duffer brothers and most of the cast just went out of their way to say that there's absolutely no way that Elle could have survived. That really kind of made it, just ruined it all for me, because I was really looking forward to that open ending. And if you watched it till this far, thanks for watching and consider subscribing. And then maybe I will see you in the next video soon.